It is my joy and privilege to introduce my friend and colleague, Jayne Ozanne, who is the director of the Ozanne Interfaith Commission on LGBT Lives and an initiative of the Ozanne Foundation. She is a prominent gay evangelical who works to ensure full inclusion of all LGBT plus Christians at every level of the church. And she works with other religious organisations around the world to eliminate discrimination on sexuality, based on sexuality or gender. She was appointed last year to join the government's LGBT advisory panel, and she chairs the UK's Ban Conversion Therapy Steering Group. Thank you for leading us. Thank you for initiating and making so much change.
Thank you, Rabbi Laura. You've just heard two very powerful testimonies about the cost of being different. And I ask you now to bear those stories in mind. I have my own story of the pain of trying to come to terms with my sexuality and the conflict I felt it had with my sexuality. And so I put myself through years of conversion therapy. You heard how Ahmed explained that is something that is being promoted in Egypt, in many Muslim countries, and it is still legal in 69 countries, including here in the UK, despite our best efforts to try and get a ban. But what is conversion therapy? It's an umbrella term in many ways for a whole set of practices that can be from talking therapies with a psychiatrist or psychologist, although none of them will now practice that, to prayer in a religious setting, hypnosis, aversion therapies, deliverance ministry and exorcisms where people believe that you have a spirit and are possessed by a demon. And sadly and horrifically, even corrective rape is used here in the UK as well as abroad. And so what we found one of the most difficult things is trying to define what conversion therapy is. And I won't go into this in too much detail, but I think what you can see here on screen is that it needs to cover all forms of interventions that seek to erase, repress or change, and any attempt to convert, cancel or suppress someone's sexual orientation and or gender identity and expression. And this is the critical thing. It needs to protect all the LGBT community, all sexual orientation and transgendered people too. Now, obviously, there are practices that will help them as they transition. But what we found around the world, looking at the best definition, is to take a combination of what Madrid in Spain, legal definition, and that in Queensland that was passed just a month ago. So, I tend to think of conversion therapy in three phases. The first phase, which can last for years, is when someone is stuck in a solitary, private agony of hell, where they are plea bargaining, as I did for years with God, begging for change, begging that if you did certain things, if you gave your life to doing certain things, that you would be healed. But at some point that gets too much and you tend to talk to people, primarily within your faith group, and you ask for support. And many churches, many other faiths too, will, out of love, come alongside you and want to pray and help with that healing process. Many will believe that you are gay because of things that might have happened to you in your past, traumas you might have been through, and you find yourself sharing some of the most intimate parts of your personal history with strangers who want to stand with you and help you. It's all done in love, but deep down you know it's not working. And you're left with the problem. You're left with being told often that you don't have enough faith, that there must be something you're not being honest about. And so when you've exhausted that phase, you tend to look for more extreme phases, deliverance ministries. There are a lot of ministries out there who will have theories as to why you are being afflicted. And again, these are good people and true, trying to help. I've spent thousands going to different courses, looking at what might be the devil inside me. Sadly, those practices can get more extreme. I know friends in Africa who've had the most horrific things done to them, very physical, brutal attacks. And that is something we wanted to try and quantify and look into what was happening. But the question is, why are people putting themselves through this this hell. And for those of us who come from various traditions within either the Christian religion or indeed within the Jewish, Muslim or any other faith, there will be different beliefs. Now, within the evangelical world, there is a belief that you are suffering from same-sex attraction. And the Evangelical Alliance, of which I was a part, and many thousands of churches and church leaders and individuals are a part, put out some guidance a few years ago now about how to minister and look after those who are suffering from same-sex attraction in their midst. They called it the EA Affirmations, which was a slightly unusual term for those of us who found it anything but affirming. There are 10 of them, and the first 8 are relatively safe, but the last 2 are really quite difficult. They are to do with habitual homoerotic sexual activity without repentance and public promotion of such. So this is where people are being told that what you are and who you are needs repentance. That you are, if you don't do that, you are subject to church discipline, which could be asked to being stepped down from leadership or being asked to leave your church. And then finally, if you aren't willing to see that your relationship, your sexual relationship is right, you're not willing to be transformed, you are asked to be put outside your church. It is a deeply sad place to be, and it has horrendous consequences. Lizzie Lowe, the daughter of some dear friends of mine, took her life back in 2014 because she thought that there was no way of being able to square the circle of being gay and being a woman of faith. And many people I know have been removed from any form of lay leadership. They have been blacklisted amongst church leaders in their neighbourhood, not being allowed to do any form of ministry in the church, not being able to play in music groups or do the prayers or work with children. And often they've been asked to leave the church if their lifestyle, i.e. their relationship with their loved one, isn't repented of. Back in 2018, we wanted to, as a foundation, find proof of how common conversion therapy is in the UK, why people put themselves through it, and at what stage of their lives they were going through it. We put together an advisory board to make this as robust as we could. Rabbi Laura was part of our group, but I was thrilled to see that Bishop of Manchester, who's the lead bishop on statistics in the Church of England, and the former chair of the Royal Statistical Society, Bernard Silverman, came on board and guided us through quite a robust process, which we worked with the Government Equalities Office. The results were shocking. We found that of over the 4,500 people who responded to our survey, 458 had attempted to change their sexuality, and 76 said that they were forced. The religious leaders played a key role within that, and we asked who was asking them and advising them to go forward. And you'll see the yellow line there. That is the religious leaders telling them that they should think or telling them that they must think about going through conversion therapy. Their friends, which is the blue line, and their family were next influencers. But it is the religious leader that is so prominent in this area, and that's why it's so important that so many religious leaders today have come together to call for a ban. We asked who advised them to go through it, and again the religious leader in yellow there was the primary person who people would willingly go to ask for advice. Sadly, a third of people had gone to no one. They'd suffered in silence. The age at which people had gone through was, I think, one of the most shocking things. We are talking about children here. Over half were under 18 when they started going through conversion therapy, and 2/3 were under 24. These are young people at the start of their lives, trying to work out who they are, who they can love. And to go through this horror at such a foundational age leaves heavy mental scars. Why had people gone through it? Well, 72%, nearly 3/4, had said because they thought it was sinful. Now, there's a religious phrase that says that who they are, they thought was unacceptable to God and to those around them. 2/3 were ashamed of who they were, and over a half said their religious leader disapproved. This is a heavy burden to place on a young person's shoulders at such an early age. And for me, this is why it's a safeguarding issue. We cannot afford our young people, like Lizzie, to be going through this hell and wondering who they are. So did it work? Well, 3/4, you won't be surprised to say, said no, it didn't. There were 15%, 16% who said they thought it worked and wore off for a while. I'd have put myself in that category. And yes, there are a few, 3.6%, who said they totally believed it worked. But to allow such misery and harm for the majority, for a couple who think that it has worked, and I have to be honest, in my whole life, I've not met someone who's believed it's worked for their whole life. I think the mental pressures we put ourselves under is huge. So, what was the experience of attempting to change sexual orientation? Well, forgive me, I can't see my own charts so well, but they found it very hard to accept themselves, and the impact on their mental health was huge. That's the brown lane. 2/3 said that they'd had mental health issues. And we asked that in more detail. The level of suicide and self-harm was just extraordinary. 2/3 of people had had suicidal thoughts, and over half a third had attempted suicide, and over half had had to have medication for the anxiety and depression. These are significantly higher levels of attempted suicide and suicidal thoughts than in the general public. And it is this harm that we need to stop. It still goes on. It's still available by Googling and on the web. And today in the UK that we have the harm bill going through for online harm. And we're working hard to make sure that people can't access these, what are, I think, torturous, and I should say the UN also agrees, torturous practices. We have to ensure that these people are not allowed to harm young children anymore. I'm thrilled that Victor Madrigal-Boles is joining us later today, but he himself has talked in great depth about the harm of conversion therapy and the need for a global ban. Ultimately, when it's conducted forcibly, it represents a breach to the prohibition of torture. And it's very clear now that torture is something that no government should be seen to sanction and should take action against. The government's own research showed that there was a level of conversion therapy in society. 5% of respondents said they'd been offered it. 51% who'd gone through it had been conducted by faith group. Sadly, our trans community were far more likely to have been offered or go through conversion therapy. And therefore, we know in the UK that this is an issue that we must address. The government is committed, and I'm glad to hear that they want to end the practice. But part of that end has to be a ban. And the longer that we take in waiting for that ban, the more lives that are being impacted. The key to all of this is looking at the elephant in the room, the difficulty of talking about faith issues in the context of sexuality. And that's why the Global Interfaith Commission on LGBT Lives exists. We want to have those conversations. We want to speak into and speak with our colleagues. We know that this is an issue that has to be addressed. But at the same time, we know that rights have limits. You can have your right up until the point that you do harm. And when you know that what you're saying is causing harm, that right must be taken away. Do no harm. It should be the mantra of every religious leader, indeed of all of us in a loving, embracing society. And that is the theme of today's conference. Thank you.